Graham Westfield sat alone at the table by the window inside the Skyfire, a crown jewel perched on the 58th floor atop Queen Anne Hill, where the city of Seattle glowed beneath him like a vibrant, living painting he had never truly felt a part of. The city lights below shimmered through the thick pane of glass, casting blurred reflections onto the crystal tumbler in his hand, a 30-year-old Scotch, quietly breathing its age into the evening air. The deep amber hue mirrored distant memories, beautiful, aching, as if time itself had been distilled into liquor and solitude. Across the table meant for two, the chair opposite him remained empty, just as it had for years. Only Graham remained, and the silence grew heavier with each successful deal. "Mr. Westfield, may I get you anything else?" The server's voice was gentle and respectful, the kind of polished tone reserved for men whose presence made entire rooms stand still. Graham shook his head slightly, eyes never leaving his glass. "No, I don't need anything else." And it wasn't just about the drink, not about dessert. It was a quiet confession. He no longer desired anything more from this life, because he had already had everything, and lost the one thing that mattered. He was Graham Westfield, CEO of Westfield Capital Group, dubbed the Golden Hand of global investment. At 43, he ruled a financial empire across 3 continents: skyscrapers, legal battalions, private jets, yachts, luxury brands, and a $50 million penthouse on Fifth Avenue. But here, in this luxurious haven among the world's rarest scotches and the soft echo of classical music, he was just a man facing himself. A text from Nathan, his twin brother and co-founder, lit up the screen. "Tokyo's closed. 9 digits. Want to celebrate, big brother?" Graham stared at the message. 9 digits. $100 million deal. To him now, just a number hollow and cold. He didn't respond. He simply placed the phone face down beside the wedding ring he no longer wore. In the pause between 2 heartbeats, memories rose like a tide. Clara. Her long brown hair was often tied lazily at the nape of her neck. That deep, laughing gaze that used to melt the tension from his bones. Winter nights by the fireplace with half-burnt pizza from their old oven and jazz humming from a tired Bluetooth speaker. He had everything, except her. "You wanted to build a kingdom. I just wanted a home." Those were Clara's final words before she walked out of the penthouse. And out of his life. A stir outside the glass wall caught Graham's eye. He frowned, stepping slowly toward the window. Beneath the dim park lights of Kerry Park, a small crowd was gathering around a woman. Something about her silhouette held him there, frozen. Brown hair pulled back hastily, a thin, faded coat, a piece of old cardboard, fingers trembling in the Seattle chill. Graham stopped breathing. He knew that frame. He recognized the way she tilted her head, the quiet but resilient stance. It was Clara. He blinked hard, not trusting what he saw. And then he saw the children, 4 of them, no older than 5, wearing identical jackets, and more than that, they looked just like him. Clara. Even from 58 stories high, he knew. It was her. No one else carried herself like that, thin but proud, shoulders bracing against the cold like a soldier refusing to fall. She stood on a street corner, holding a tattered sign. "Please help. Anything helps. God bless." But she wasn't alone. 4 children stood close beside her, 4 little boys about 5 years old, wrapped in old matching coats, shivering in the Seattle night like lost baby birds. And then Graham's heart stopped, not because of the poverty, not because of the shock, but because of their faces. 4 pairs of gray-blue eyes, 4 square jaws, 4 tousled heads of dark, wavy hair, each one a mirror of his own. No DNA test is needed, no questions, no confirmation. Graham knew. They were his. Crash. The sound of the Scotch glass shattering on the marble floor rang out like thunder in the refined hush of the restaurant. Heads turned. Whispers stirred. A server rushed toward him, but Graham heard nothing, felt nothing. Nothing else mattered. His world had just detonated. In silence. Without a word, he shoved the linen napkin aside, stood up, leaving behind a half-eaten Wagyu steak and a crisp $100 bill on the table. A final gesture from a man who no longer existed. He stormed toward the elevator like a hurricane. A 43-year-old man, once the very embodiment of control, now moving like the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Seattle, early winter night. The wind sliced through his shirt like razors, bitter and sharp against his skin. The glass doors of the Skyfire swung open as Graham Westfield rushed out, like a man waking from a 6-year nightmare, still unsure if he was truly awake. The sounds behind him, tinkling piano, crystal glasses clinking, elegant laughter, faded into white noise behind a wall of memory and panic. Each step he took across the cold pavement felt like stepping across his conscience. His silk tie was askew. The top button of his shirt is undone. Cashmere coat, forgotten on the restaurant chair. But he didn't feel the cold. Didn't have time to feel anything anymore. Only one phrase echoed through his mind, over and over again, like a shattered bell ringing in an abandoned chapel. Don't go. Please don't disappear. He sprinted across the misty sidewalk, eyes scanning the street below Queen Anne Hill, like a man who'd just lost the most important thing in his life. And then he saw them. A scene that looked torn from an old dream, too real to deny. A small street corner, beneath the golden halo of broken fog lights. Clara was kneeling. The 4 children stood close beside her, curled up like baby birds with no nest beneath a cold, indifferent sky. She was pulling a worn-out hat over one of the boys' heads, her fingers trembling, face pale in the wind. The other 3 stood nearby, holding hands, their wide eyes guarded by instinct. And then Clara looked up. Their eyes met, and the world stopped. Not metaphorically, literally. A moment where time held its breath because too much truth arrived all at once. That gaze, the one that once made Graham abandon boardrooms just to hold her for 60 seconds, now looked at him as if staring through a ghost that had long since died, stunned, angry, wounded, and finally resigned. Graham. She whispered. His name barely escaped her lips, like a buried relic suddenly resurrected. She pulled the children closer, the instinct of a mother, or the instinct of a woman life had taught. No one gets to take what little I have left. Graham froze. He looked down at the small faces pressed against Clara's side. 4 pairs of gray-blue eyes, 4 heads of wavy dark brown hair, 4 tiny reflections of himself, as if someone had cut them from a photograph of him at their age. One of them, slightly taller, eyes brighter, more defiant, stepped forward just a little, shielding his mother and brothers like a sentinel. That stance. Graham had once owned it, when he was 10, standing at the edge of summer camp, guarding Nathan from new kids who sneered. "We're okay, Mum," the boy said. "Steady." Each word fell from his lips like a rough echo of Graham himself, back when he still knew how to love without knowing how to hurt. Graham nearly collapsed. Something inside him cracked, quietly, like that Scotch glass, years ago, falling from his hand and shattering across cold marble floors. He dropped to his knees. For the first time in 20 years as a titan of business. For the first time as a man who no longer deserved to call himself a father. "Clara," he stammered. His throat was dry as a bone. "They're mine, aren't they?" Clara didn't answer, but her face said it all. No more fury, no more blame. Just eyes too tired to cry anymore. Graham turned toward the 4 boys, now watching him not with logic, but with instinct. A silent connection. No words are needed, no DNA, no proof. Just one look was enough. And at that moment, in the cold Seattle night, Graham Westfield, the man who once stood before world-shaking boards, who signed deals that made global markets tremble for the first time, was no longer a CEO. He was a father, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to love without condition. Graham couldn't speak. He stood frozen in the winter air like someone flung from his world and dropped into a reality he wasn't ready to face. 4 pairs of young eyes stared at him, not in fear, but with that strange, wordless knowing that only children possess when they recognize something, even if they don't yet understand why. One of the boys, the tallest, stepped forward. His frame was still small, but his gaze strong. The way he shifted slightly, angling his shoulder to shield the others. Graham recognized it instantly. It was his posture. Age 10. The reflex to protect Nathan from bullies on the school playground. Something no genetic code could define. It could only be blood. Only be a reflection. Only be his child. "Mom," the boy spoke up, clear but calm. "Who's that man?" There was no fear in his voice, just caution. The guarded edge of a child who'd grown up too fast, in circumstances no child should ever face. Clara gripped his hand tighter. Graham slowly knelt, not stepping closer, keeping distance as if afraid that one wrong move might cause the moment to disappear like a dream. "I'm someone who used to know your mom a long time ago." The boy's blue-gray eyes didn't blink. They seemed to cut right through Graham's expensive coat, right through the years of wealth and silence. Graham felt like the child was questioning him, without saying a word. Beside him, another boy tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mom, I'm hungry." Just 3 words, a simple sentence, but to Graham, it landed like a bare fist against his chest. Hungry. Right below the very restaurant, where he had just walked away from a Wagyu steak worth more than a week's food for this entire family. Just beneath the opulence of the 58th floor, the place where he once believed he stood at the top of the world, everything was suddenly different. Graham's voice escaped like a confession. "They're mine, aren't they?" Clara didn't answer, but her silence thundered louder than any scream. A single tear slid down her cheek, slow, quiet, as if it had waited 6 years for permission to fall. Graham clenched his fists. His face had turned pale, as if he had just come face to face with 4 miniature versions of himself. He opened his mouth, but his throat felt torn and dry, like it had been scraped with sand and stone. I had no idea." His voice was hoarse, like the very air was choking him with guilt. Clara looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, but dry, as if the years of raising 4 children alone had drained every tear from her. "I called," she said, barely more than a breath. 3 times. Your office. Your secretary said, "You don't take personal calls." Graham felt like someone had driven a fist into his chest. No blood, no injury, just pain, paralyzing pain. At that moment, one of the boys, maybe Aiden, by the deep ache in Graham's bones, tilted his head, watching him closely. He wasn't scared. He was simply trying to understand something no one had put into words. "Are you a bad guy?" Aiden asked. His voice wasn't loud, but each word scraped across Graham's soul. "You look at us like you're crying inside, but your eyes forgot how." Graham trembled, not from cold, from shame. He dropped to his knees, palms pressing against the freezing pavement. No longer Graham Westfield, billionaire CEO, architect of global acquisitions. Just a man. A father learning to ask for the right to be a father for the very first time. "Clara," he said, voice nearly breaking, "please, let me take you and the kids to dinner. Not to make up for anything, not to fix the past. Just to hear them talk, to know what they like to eat, to sit at a table, not as a CEO, but as a man. And if afterward you still want me gone, I'll go. No conditions, no strings, I swear." Clara stood still, her hand resting protectively on her children's shoulders. She studied him, her eyes dissecting every syllable, peeling away the words to see if anything inside them was a lie. And then she nodded. Slow, small, but real. Not forgiveness, but a door left just barely ajar. 1 hour later, they sat inside a modest family diner tucked beneath Queen Anne Hill, a place the city lights couldn't reach. But the warm glow of a single ceiling bulb was enough to soften the night. There was no Bordeaux, no candlelight, just dim yellow light, vinyl chairs worn at the edges, and the smell of bubbling cheese and old-style pepperoni pizza. The scent of quiet evenings without crowns or credit lines. Clara sat on the edge of her seat, like she might leave at any moment. She didn't remove her scarf, didn't take off her coat. She just sat still, eyes tracing every movement of her sons like a mother long trained to survive unpredictability. As for Graham, he couldn't remember the last time he sat on a chair this wobbly. Maybe back in college, eating ramen at some midnight dive. But one thing he knew for certain. He had never seen children eat like this. Like every bite was a battle against hunger. Aiden, watchful and serious, ate slowly, methodically, all while glancing toward Graham. His look wasn't hostile, just cautious, like a young analyst learning to read balance sheets with only his instincts. Caleb, quiet and composed, wiped his mouth with a napkin after each bite, the kind of boy who would return the cap to the bottle exactly where it belonged. Emerson, half singing to himself as he chewed, let his little fingers bounce to a rhythm no one else could hear, like a boy whose mind lived in a place with skies, not spreadsheets. Finn, the quietest, didn't eat, didn't speak. He just watched Graham, intently, not with fear, but with a kind of silent interrogation. His gray-blue eyes pierced straight through Graham's designer shirt, past the Patek Philippe watch, through the polished exterior of CEO Graham Westfield, and touched the man underneath. And then Finn spoke, his voice soft as a mist, but enough to make Clara flinch. "Why do you look like us?" No one laughed. No one said a word, only the faint clink of a fork settling onto a plate, and Clara's eyes, sharp as a blade, just drawn from its sheath, locked onto Graham's. He understood. Not here, not now, not in the middle of a meal where 4 little boys were laughing for the first time beside the father they didn't know was theirs. He smiled, softly, carefully, like a distant uncle. "I'm not sure, Finn. Maybe just a coincidence. Life's full of strange things, you know." Clara closed her eyes for a second. It was the first moment Graham saw her soften, even just a little. "Who wants ice cream?" Clara asked, her voice a welcome rescue. Me, I want 2 scoops." 4 little voices burst out in harmony, a tiny, perfectly timed chorus. Graham laughed. For the first time that night, it wasn't all real laughter. He reached into his pocket for his wallet, reflexively about to pay, like always. But then he caught Clara's gaze. Still, gentle, but unmistakable. Don't overdo it. Don't make them think happiness comes with a price tag. Graham understood. He quietly set the wallet back down and turned to the waitress with a smile. 4 scoops of vanilla, please. Just the regular kind. As the kids rushed toward the fish tank near the window, faces pressed to the glass where goldfish swam in lazy circles, Clara remained seated. She sat across from Graham, hands clasped on the table, as if holding herself together. They're yours, aren't they? Graham's voice didn't tremble, but his eyes were rimmed red. Clara didn't nod. She didn't shake her head either. She just looked at him, long, very long, as if her eyes were flipping through every month, every sleepless night, every can of formula she couldn't afford, as if she were silently asking, "You see it now?" Then she said it. 3 weeks after I signed the divorce papers, I found out I was pregnant. Graham shut his eyes. His entire body slipped into a state of weightlessness. I didn't know. I couldn't have imagined. I know. Clara smiled, but not the warm kind. It was the smile of someone who had taught herself to swallow pain, one day at a time. Back then, you were in the middle of IPO talks, one call from me. Didn't stand a chance against the back-to-back calendar blocks of Graham Westfield. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. "Clara," he said, gripping the glass of lemonade, his palms damp with sweat. "Let me do something. Anything. Even just a small part. Make it up?" Clara turned to the fish tank, where the kids were squealing every time a goldfish broke the surface. "They don't need a bank account, Graham. They need a father. And all it takes is for you to be brave enough to be that. That's it. I'll be here. Tomorrow. Next week. Every day." Graham didn't know where that courage came from. He only knew this was the first time he spoke with no talk of money, no contracts, no deadlines. Just a man choosing to stay. Clara looked at him, for the first time not with anger, not with tension, but with something that looked a little like understanding. "Discovery Park. 2 o'clock, if you mean it." Then she stood up. No more words, and Graham remained seated, alone, in a red plastic chair. His heartbeat was out of sync. His palm was still warm from where she had rested hers on the table. He looked toward the fish tank, where 4 little boys were laughing, unaware that their world, and his, was about to open into a new chapter. Graham nodded. Not the nod of a CEO signing off a billion-dollar merger. Not the corporate head tilt he'd given in so many boardrooms where everything was numbers. But the nod of a man who had just realized something more valuable than everything he'd ever owned. Life. Blood. 4 tiny hearts. And a family that never had a name. Clara was the first to rise. Her movements are still sharp, alert, like every single mom who has learned how to walk away from any situation in a heartbeat. She called for the boys, gently but firmly, reminding them to grab their coats, knit hats, and scarves. Her gestures were swift, practiced, and full of a quiet strength that left Graham stunned. For 6 years, she had done it all, alone, raising 4 children who looked just like him in every glance, every stride. He turned to look at them again, still chattering by the fish tank, unaware of the world outside. Finn was the last to leave. He trailed behind, silent. A tiny hand clutched a plastic ice cream stirrer, like it was a treasure. And then he turned back. His eyes, that stormy gray blue like misted quartz, locked onto Graham, light but piercing, like an invisible red string had suddenly tied 2 generations together. "Will you come to play with us sometime?" Finn asked, his voice barely a breath but clear as a bell in Graham's chest. A simple question, a quiet invitation. But to Graham it was the first door opening to a chapter that had never been written. He swallowed. His heart dropped from his chest straight to the floor. "If your mom says yes, I'll be there," he smiled, steadying himself. "And I'll bring a kite." Finn nodded. "I like the color blue," he said. Graham chuckled, not loud, but real, the kind of laugh he hadn't known in years, after a lifetime of offering tight-lipped smirks to soulless accomplishments. "Good," he said. "Me too." They stepped out of the diner, into the softening night air. The streetlights cast long shadows of the children across the brick sidewalk, like faint pencil strokes inside a brand-new memory. Graham paused at the door, watching the 4 boys walk beside Clara, their tiny hands clutching the edge of her coat. A family, but missing one. A story, but only its prologue. He didn't call out, didn't chase after them. He just stood there, like a boy for the first time standing outside the gates of a home he had always dreamed of entering. Inside the diner, the table still held a few strands of spaghetti, a spill of lemonade, and the chair he had occupied, never once leaning back into comfort. There were no white linens, no silver cutlery, no waiters in tuxedos, just an old wooden table, 4 children eating pasta like it was the greatest meal they'd ever had. And one man, once the torchbearer of Wall Street, now learning to listen to the first voice rising from his own heart. "Will you come to play with us?" A question that seemed simple, but it had broken Graham Westfield, and in doing so, saved him. Graham opened his mouth but couldn't speak. Then, one of the boys looked up, eyes drilling straight into him. "Why do you look like us?" The air froze. Graham lowered his gaze, steadying his voice. "Some people look alike, by coincidence." That line left his throat dry, but Clara's glance at that moment, full of gratitude, exhaustion, and sorrow, said everything. He had done the right thing, for the boys, for Clara, for a truth that still needed time. As the kids were ushered toward the small aquarium outside the diner, Graham and Clara sat alone across from each other, for the first time in 6 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice low and rough. Clara met his eyes. "You remember the day we signed the divorce papers? I tried to call you 3 times. Your assistant said, 'Mr. Westfield doesn't take personal calls.' I didn't know." "I know," she exhaled. "But when I found out I was pregnant, with 4, what did you expect me to do, Graham? Would you have accepted them? Or sent your lawyers instead?" Graham swallowed. His chest felt hollow as if his heart had fallen straight through. "I'm sorry." And that's where part 2 ended. The hinge between an uncovered truth and a yet unspoken promise. The chance to become a father to the children who had never known he existed. "I want to be their dad, Clara, not just by name." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Just dinner. Then we'll talk." The next morning, Graham Westfield woke up, and it wasn't like any other morning. Not from the chime of his luxury smart alarm, not from his virtual assistant reminding him of a Tokyo briefing. Not because of interest rates shifting on the pre-market NASDAQ, but from a dream, or rather, a flood of memories that had never existed. Until now. He opened his eyes in the soft morning light, filtering through the glass windows of his 8,000 square foot penthouse. But in his mind, he was still sitting in that tiny family diner from the night before. Instead of hearing the city wake up below him, he heard Clara's voice whispering, like a wave, inside his chest. Aiden is the eldest. He always protects the others, just like you used to, Graham. Caleb's smart, but anxious. He's scared of car horns, of strangers, but he knows how to calm the others when I'm tired. Emerson's always dreaming. He sings while he yachts and waves his hands when he hears music. That boy lives in another world. And Finn, he doesn't talk much, but he notices everything. Who's sad, who's tired, who forgot to tie their shoes. He sees it all. He's like you, Graham, only quieter. Graham brought a hand to his mouth. Something rose in his chest. Not guilt, not quite pain, something fuller. For the first time in 43 years of being an adult, he felt truly awake. Not from alarms, but from 4 names. Aiden, Caleb, Emerson, Finn. 4 names, 4 personalities, 4 missing pieces. Once lost, now suddenly rediscovered. He sat up, his feet landing on the cold hardwood floor. The room was so quiet, he could hear his heartbeat. Graham didn't look in the mirror. He didn't need to, because he knew. The eyes of 4 little boys from the night before were reflected inside him, clearer than any image ever captured in glass. The eyes of Aiden, protective, brave, lips quivering in the cold, but standing tall. Caleb, timid, but reaching out to open a ketchup lid for his brother. Emerson, humming while twirling a straw, conducting a full symphony in his mind. And Finn, the one who had asked, "Will you come to play with us?" A question so small, yet it shattered part of the proud fortress within Graham. The part that once believed he lacked nothing. He reached for his phone, not to check emails, not to glance at market tickers, but to open a text message. One line had been typed since dawn, waiting to be sent. "Clara, today. I'll be at the park. 2 p.m. I'll bring a kite. Blue." Graham took a deep breath, then tapped send. He didn't wait for a reply, because he knew. A real father doesn't need an invitation. A real father shows up. That afternoon, Graham Westfield wasn't just heading to a park. He was stepping into a part of life he'd spent 43 years too afraid to touch. No driver, no assistant at his side, no phone strapped to his hip. Just him, in a light gray sweater and a pair of jeans he used to think were unbecoming for a CEO. Just a man, going to meet his children for the very first time. Kerry Park greeted him with just enough chill to keep his hands tucked into his pockets. A breeze tugged at the graying edges of his hair. The sun was dipping lower, casting golden streaks across the lawn when Graham saw them. 4 little light blue jackets darting around the open grass. Clara sat on a stone bench, her brown hair tied back, face calm, but her eyes held a quiet light that tugged at his chest. He stood there, a few steps behind, unnoticed, watching each child's movements as if blinking might make them disappear. Clara didn't turn, but her voice floated back. "You're 1 minute late." Her tone was calm, airy, but it shook something inside him. "That's a new record for a CEO," he replied, forcing a smile. The children spotted him quickly. They clustered near Clara like little satellites orbiting their central planet. Their eyes were hesitant, a wary kind of curiosity. Clara introduced him, voice steady. "Kids, this is Mr. Graham, an old friend of Mommy's." "Old friend." Caleb squinted. "He looks just like us," Finn said, eyes fixed on Graham's face. "Like looking in a mirror," Emerson whispered, tracing shapes in the air with his finger. Only Aiden, tiny yet solemn, stayed still, arms folded like an adult evaluating a negotiation. Graham slowly sat on the grass, careful to keep just enough distance not to overwhelm them. "Do you like ice cream?" A simple question, the kind that they don't teach at business school, but the only way into a child's world. 3 hours later, Graham found himself on a wooden carousel near Discovery Lake, laughing so hard his face hurt, trying 3 ice cream flavors he'd never dared order before. Each child was a mini version of himself, but not exactly. Aiden, brave, leading, always glancing back to make sure his siblings kept up. Caleb, cautious, curious, asking endless questions that made Graham feel like he was being interviewed on TED Talk. Emerson, a dreamer, telling stories about a planet called Red Luna, where everyone floated and no one ever fought. Finn, the quietest, but the one who saw the most. As the sky dimmed, they gathered beneath the granite monument at the park's center. Clara brushed leaves off a bench. The boys sprawled across the grass, legs crossed or lying flat. Then, unexpectedly, Finn spoke up, his voice soft as wind slipping through leaves. "Mr. Graham, do you have kids?" Graham turned toward Clara. She didn't answer. She just gave a small nod, so slight, but with the weight of a bridge finally lowered. He turned back, eyes meeting each boy's. "Yes," he said, gently. "I do." All 4 froze. Finn tilted his head, Caleb's brow furrowed. Emerson's eyes grew round. Only Aiden, arms still crossed, stepped forward. "So, are you our dad?" That moment, no stage lights, no cameras, no applause. Just the sunset spilling across 4 tiny faces, and a man learning to breathe inside the truth of his own life. Graham swallowed. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "Yes, I'm your dad." Clara rested her hand on her knee. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain, but relief. "I thought Dad lived far away," Caleb whispered. "Does he live in a palace?" Emerson asked, eyes still wide. "Like in comic books?" Finn didn't say anything. He simply scooted closer, sat beside Graham, and laid his head on the man's arm. And Aiden. He stood there, staring at the man who'd been missing for all 5 years of his life. And then, with the patience and gravity of a boy forced to grow up too fast, he nodded. "All right. But you have to play soccer with us, and buy popcorn, and no being late again." Graham chuckled. Not the kind of chuckle you see on the cover of Forbes, not the one used to charm investors, but the laugh of a father, one who'd just been handed a chance to begin again. He swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, and I'm sorry for not being there from the start." Clara held Aiden's hand, but her eyes glistened. A soft breeze passed, carrying the scent of fresh grass and hope. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Westfield Capitol gleamed with light, yet felt colder than stone. Graham had never felt more like a stranger in it, despite being the one who designed every light fixture and every corner of that table. Wallace Westfield, his twin brother and co-founder, leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded, eyes sharp enough to scan through steel. "You skipped a meeting with Japanese investors to go to a park." Graham sat down, saying nothing. His gaze rested on the photo newly placed on his desk, a phone snapshot from the day before at Kerry Park. Aiden standing tall, Caleb grins wide, Emerson making a silly face, and Finn, those eyes, still carving straight into his soul. "Just making sure I heard that right," Wallace continued, calm tone veiling a bitter edge. "You turned down a $170 million deal for an afternoon at the park with 4 kids you just met yesterday." "It wasn't just an afternoon at the park," Graham said. "It was the first time I saw my children." The room went frozen for 3 seconds. Wallace raised an eyebrow. Children? 4 quadruplets. They're mine, with Clara. Wallace let out a dry laugh. Not amused, just disbelieving. Clara. Clara Monroe. The woman you divorced 6 years ago. She suddenly shows up with 4 kids who look like you, right as Westfield Capital completes its IPO. You don't see the timing as convenient. Graham met his brother's gaze head-on. I was suspicious, too, Wallace, at first. But then I saw the kids, heard them ask their mom for food in a hungry voice, watched Clara pull Emerson's coat tighter against the wind. Nothing about that moment was staged. And you're certain they're yours? I am. Graham nodded firmly. But if you want it in writing, I've scheduled a DNA test. Results by Friday.
Wallace exhaled through his nose, stepping to the window. The Seattle skyline reflected the glow of a fading sun. What are you doing, Graham? Do you know how many deals we've got on deck? The London Fund? The Singapore merger? Do you think you can be CEO and father to 4 5-year-olds? With an ex-wife who ghosted you? Graham stood, approaching him. You haven't met them, Wallace. You don't know what it's like to see yourself, truly, in the eyes of a child you didn't even know existed. Don't bring emotion in here. Wallace snapped, lower now, but cutting. Emotion kills companies. Emotion is why Clara disappeared right before the IPO. Graham stiffened. She left because of me. Because I chose expansion over being a husband and a father. And now, I'm trying to fix that. Wallace looked at him long and hard. And what if she wants something? A share of the company? A title? Or worse? Full custody and financial control over those kids? She hasn't asked for a thing, Graham said quietly. Not a dollar, not a complaint. She's been living in a rented apartment, scraping by on part-time library work. She just wants to raise them, on her own. Wallace's jaw clenched. No one just wants to raise kids in silence for 5 years. If this is real, and I mean if, then you're walking into danger. And I won't let you bring our empire down with it. The meeting ended in silence. Wallace stormed out, leaving Graham alone beneath the blood-orange glow of sunset. He turned back to his desk, checked his phone. A message from Clara. The boys want to know if you'll come by to read tonight. Finn kept the book you left. Graham didn't hesitate. 3 simple words. Of course I will. The next evening, he stood outside a weather department door in Ballard. In one hand, a brown paper bag of cookies. In the other, a children's book from his childhood. Where the Wild Things Are. He couldn't remember the last time he'd held it. Only that yesterday, Finn tugged his sleeve and whispered, "We didn't finish it." The door swung open. Emerson leapt up. "Max, he's here." Graham laughed. Even 3 days after that first park visit, they still called him Max. The name Clara had used as a placeholder. But it didn't matter. They ran up and wrapped themselves around his legs like it had always been that way. "Shall we read?" Graham asked, holding up the cookie bag like a golden ticket. "Yes," all 4 shouted. Clara stood by the kitchen doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel. Her expression was warm, but guarded. Less so than before. "I made chicken soup," she said softly. "You're welcome to stay." Graham hesitated, then nodded. "If you let me do the dishes." Clara smiled, not the polite kind, not the measured one, the kind he remembered falling for. Dinner was filled with laughter, warm soup, and overlapping stories from school. Aiden proudly showed a paper with 3 gold stars from his teacher. Caleb tried to explain the rules of, "All right, but Dad has to play soccer with us, and buy popcorn, and no more being late?" Graham chuckled, a smile not found on the cover of Forbes, nor used to attract investors. But the smile of a father granted a second chance, to begin anew. Graham swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, and I'm sorry for not being there from the start." Clara held Aiden's hand, but her eyes glistened. A gentle breeze passed by, carrying the scent of fresh grass and hope. The conference room on the 47th floor of Westfield Capital's headquarters was bathed in light, but felt cold as stone. Graham had never felt this place so unfamiliar, despite being the one who designed every desk corner and lamp. Wallace Westfield, his twin brother and co-founder, leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes sharp as X-rays. "You skipped a meeting with Japanese investors to go to the park?" Graham sat down, silent. His gaze rested on the photo of the 4 children quietly placed on his desk. A new photo, taken with a phone, yesterday, at Cary Park, Aiden standing solemnly, Caleb grinning, Emerson making a silly face, and Finn, those eyes still piercing his heart. "Just to clarify," Wallace continued, his tone calm but laced with sharpness, "you turned down a $170 million deal for a park trip with 4 kids you've known for less than a day." "It wasn't just a park trip," Graham said. "It was the first time I saw my children." The room froze in silence for 3 seconds. Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Children? Android apps on Google Play 4? Quadruplets? My children and Clara's?" Wallace let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. "Clara? Clara Monroe? The woman you divorced 6 years ago? She suddenly reappears with 4 kids who look like you, right when Westfield Capital just had a successful IPO. You don't find that suspicious?" Graham looked straight at his brother. "I had doubts too, Wallace. At first. But then I saw the kids. Heard them call Mom with hungry voices. Watched Clara pull an old coat over Emerson in the cold wind. None of that was staged." "And you're sure they're yours?" "Absolutely." Graham nodded firmly. "But if you need it in black and white, I've scheduled a DNA test. Results will be in by Friday." Wallace sighed, walking to the window, eyes on Seattle's skyline, where glass buildings reflected the sunset. "What are you doing, Graham?" "Do you know how much we have to handle? Investment funds from London? A merger deal from Singapore? You think you can be both a CEO and a father to 4 5-year-olds, living with an ex-wife who disappeared without explanation?" Graham stood, approaching his brother. "You haven't met the kids, Wallace. You don't know the feeling. When you see yourself, truly, in the eyes of a child you never knew existed." "Don't bring emotions into this," Wallace interrupted, his voice lower but sharper. "Emotions kill corporations. Emotions are why Clara left right before that IPO." Graham stiffened. "She left because of me, because I chose to expand the company instead of being a father and a husband. And now I'm making amends." Wallace looked at him, long and hard. What if she wants something? A share, a position in the company, or worse, custody and full financial control over the kids? "She hasn't asked for anything," Graham said. "Not a dime, not a complaint. Just living in a rented apartment, earning every dollar through part-time work at the local library. She just wants to raise the kids." Wallace's voice tightened. "No one just wants to raise kids in silence for 5 years. If this is real, and I say if, then you're entering dangerous territory. And I won't let you drag our entire empire down with you." The meeting ended in silence. Wallace left the room, leaving Graham bathed in the fiery glow of the sunset, his face heavy with questions. He turned back to his desk, picked up his phone, and opened a message from Clara. "The kids want to know if you can come over tomorrow to read bedtime stories. Finn took the book you left the other day." Graham didn't hesitate. Just 3 words. "Of course." The next afternoon, Graham stood before an old wooden door in a Ballard apartment complex, holding a paper bag of cookies and a children's book that once belonged to him. Where the Wild Things Are. He couldn't recall the last time he held it, only that yesterday Finn had tugged his hand and whispered, "We haven't finished reading." The door swung open. Emerson jumped up. "Max, he's here." Graham laughed. Though it had been 3 days since their first outing at the park, the kids still called him Max, the name Victoria used to introduce him. But to him, that didn't matter. Bryce smiled, and then the music began. A simple, slightly clumsy melody, but within it was an entire universe of pride from a little boy who knew his dad was right there, listening with his whole heart.
Clara turned to Graham. She didn't need to say anything, because at that moment, every question had its answer. A small cafe tucked into an alley near Kerry Park. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass window, painting golden streaks of time lingering in the breeze. Graham stepped in, his heart beating softly but steadily. Clara was already seated in the corner booth. She didn't need to look up. She knew he had arrived. The ash-gray sweater wrapped gently around her frame. Delicate, resilient, and still seemingly braced for something left unsaid. He pulled out the chair and sat across from her. "You called me first," Graham said calmly. "That's a good sign." Clara didn't smile, but something softened in her eyes. "I don't want to keep avoiding it," she said. "The kids are starting to ask questions I don't know how to answer anymore." Graham nodded. He understood. "Yesterday, Aiden asked me why. If you're their dad, I cried when Bryce played his song." She looked at him. Her eyes were full of emotions that couldn't be named. "I'm scared that if they find out you're their dad, and then you leave again." "Do you think I would?" Graham asked gently. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I used to know who you were, Graham. A man who lived to succeed, to rise, to prove something to the world. But not everyone can survive in that current. I nearly drowned in it." Graham bowed his head. Her words weren't knives. They were truth. "I know. And you're right. When you walked away, I thought I'd lost a woman, but really I dropped an entire future." Clara looked up at him. This time, her eyes began to well. Graham continued, his voice slow, like the soft score of a setting sun. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, or to make some rushed proposal. I just want to ask you one thing." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. Bryce's crayon drawing. 5 figures, all holding hands. The tallest had messy hair like his. The kids were mirror images, and the woman in the center, those eyes were undeniably Clara's. He placed it gently on the table, as it might wrinkle under the weight of breath. "Can we take it slow? Not go back to what we were, but start over from their first handhold, from the park bench, from that tiny kitchen where they argue over dinosaurs and stars." Clara stayed silent for a long time, and then she placed her hand over the drawing, softly brushing the crooked lines as if touching her own heart. "Graham," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "The day Aiden had a fever, I wished there was someone to stay up with me. When Parker scraped his knee, I could only hush him with clumsy lullabies. when Wesley was teased for his old backpack. I nearly cried in front of him, and when Bryce asked, "Does anyone love you, Mom?" I had no answer. Her voice cracked. Now I know. If they're going to call someone Dad, it has to be someone who never disappears. Graham swallowed hard. One hand reached across the table and covered hers. "I'll be here. No matter what we are, no matter where this goes, I'm still their father, every day." Clara exhaled, not from exhaustion, but as a release of fear, of the past, of years spent carrying it all alone. "Then we'll do this," she said, "not as a couple, but as two grown-ups choosing to be parents, together." End of the day, outside the cafe. Graham walked Clara to the door. She lightly touched his arm as she stepped out, the first smile of the day blooming on her lips. "Oh, Graham, tomorrow's field day at school. The kids want you to bring peanut butter sandwiches. But remember, no raisins. Bryce will know." Graham laughed. "Got it. No raisins. What could be more important than that, right?" Clara nodded and walked away. As her silhouette disappeared into the fading light, Graham stood still, gently gripping Bryce's drawing in his hand. Because some things you only realize are priceless when you almost lose them forever. A sleek black SUV pulled up slowly in front of Reed Capital's headquarters, the towering glass building in Bellevue's business district. From afar, camera flashes already started blinking. But today, no one stepped out in a lone power suit. Graham opened the door and held the hands of Aiden, Caleb, Emerson, and Finn. All four boys wore crisp white shirts and navy ties, school uniforms, but to the crowd, they looked like miniature versions of him. Clara stepped out last, smoothing their collars and offering Graham a look of quiet encouragement. "It'll be fine. You've already been their father. Today is just the first time the world sees it." Graham nodded, but as he turned, his eyes sharpened. The look of the man once called Wall Street's Steel Hawk. Only today, he wasn't fighting for stocks. He was fighting for the trust of 4 children. Reed Capital Conference Hall. Special session. The sealed glass boardroom glowed with digital screens showing falling Tokyo shares. Nathan sat at the head of the table, tied tight, gazing like ice. "You're late, Graham." Graham didn't rush to reply. He pulled out a chair and placed his hands on the microphone. "I had something more important to prioritize, but I'm still CEO, and I'm still here." Nathan furrowed his brow. "You skipped the shareholder meeting. Let the press capture those adorable photos with 4 boys who look exactly like you, and now you brought the kids into the building." A few murmurs stirred around the room. Graham smiled, softly but sharp. "Exactly. I brought in my family." The whispers grew louder. A marketing executive leaned forward, concerned. "We need clarity, Graham. Do you have 4 children? You've been hiding?" Graham stood, back straight. "Not hiding. I just found out. Those boys are my sons. I've already missed 5 years of their lives, but I won't lose another second." His gaze swept across the room. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you. After the meeting, headlines, gossip, and decisions." Later that afternoon, social media exploded with a photo of Graham Reed walking out of headquarters, holding the hands of 4 boys. The caption read, "From cold CEO to warm father, Graham Reed reveals quadruplet sons during the financial storm." The hashtags number, Father First, and number CEO with a heart trended across Twitter. That evening, an unexpected blow. In the Mercer Island living room, Graham was building a puzzle with the boys when his phone buzzed. Nathan. Graham picked up. His brother's voice was as tight as a wire. "You should check your internal emails. The board's holding an early confidence vote. They think you're distracted, emotional, and a PR risk." Graham closed his eyes. Clara looked at him, didn't ask, just waited. "I'll handle it," he said simply. The next morning, a surprising move by Graham in an email to the entire company. Graham didn't defend himself. Instead, he sent a short video, filmed by Aiden with a tablet. In the clip, Graham is teaching the boys about responsibility, finances, and compassion. "What's success?" he asks. "Eating pizza with the people you love after a hard day." Emerson grins. "Not leaving people when they need you," Caleb says seriously. "Going to meetings with Dad and drinking hot chocolate," Finn adds, proudly holding up his cup. Graham smiles and turns the camera on himself. "I used to think success was a number on a screen. Now I know. It starts with the word Dad." Then, what no one expected. On the day of the vote, a shock came. Nathan Reed stood up to defend his brother. "Graham may have missed a few meetings, but I've never seen him this focused and clear-headed. He's rediscovered something we've all lost. The purpose of creating value not just for shareholders, but for real people." Vote tally: 8 in favor, 3 against. Graham retained his CEO seat. But he knew he had chosen the harder path, becoming a real father and never again using work as an excuse to leave. That night, Graham sat in the room with his 4 sleeping sons, each clutching a brand new stuffed bear. Clara stepped in quietly, saying, "They chose you, not just because of talent, but because, finally, you become someone who knows what he's living for." Graham turned to her. "I used to be the CEO of an empire." "And now?" she asked. He squeezed her hand, his eyes deep with meaning. "Now, I'm the CEO of a family." Clara's small house in Kirkland was quieter than usual that night, not because the 4 boys were missing, but because Graham had done something he'd never done before. He'd put them to bed, alone. Upstairs, the warm glow of soft lights illuminated a bedroom plastered with stickers of dinosaurs, superheroes, and planets. Aiden, Caleb, Emerson, and Finn were snuggled up tight against him on a bunk bed, far too small for 5. Graham didn't mind. At that moment, his heart, once a locked vault, felt wide open. "Dad Graham," Emerson whispered, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. "If we used to be a secret, what are we now?" Graham gently wrapped an arm around him, eyes misty. "Now, you're the best part of my life." Caleb suddenly sat up, like he'd remembered something vital. "Do you remember what tomorrow is?" "Saturday," Graham guessed. "Family day at school. Parents come and show pictures of our family." Graham froze. Last time, Clara didn't let them go. Said they didn't have enough pictures. But this time, he knew they had more than enough. More than any picture frame in the world. "So what should we bring tomorrow?" he asked. "I already drew something," Finn shouted, as he jumped off the bed and rummaged through his backpack. Pulling out a crumpled sheet of paper, it was a drawing, 5 figures, a tall adult in the middle, and 4 small boys on either side, all holding hands. Above them, in wobbly letters, it read, "The Reed family, Dad and us." Graham swallowed hard, pressing the paper to his chest. "This is the most beautiful drawing I've ever received." The elementary school courtyard at Kirkland buzzed like a fair. The 4 Reed boys, dressed in white shirts and purple bow ties, proudly led Graham down the hallway like they were showing off a treasure. "That's my dad," Wesley announced proudly to the teacher. "He works in finance, but every night he tells dragon stories. And he can cook pasta," Emerson added. "Not as good as Mom, but still edible," Caleb stated matter-of-factly, sending the whole class into laughter. A teacher leaned in and whispered to Graham, "I used to think you were one of those cold CEOs the press talks about, but I was wrong." Graham glanced at his boys, then replied, "So was I, about what matters." When Clara opened the door, she didn't expect to find Graham and the 4 boys holding Disneyland tickets. "This family needs a fresh start," he said. Clara blinked. "Don't you have a meeting?" Graham smiled softly. "I do, but I just texted Nathan. You can replace me with AI, but don't try replacing me as their dad." Clara chuckled, then froze as she noticed the 4 new backpacks Graham had picked out himself. One with comets, one with sharks, one with dinosaurs, and the last simply said, "My dad is a legend." "When are we leaving?" she asked quietly. "Tonight, if you'll come too." Graham held out his hand, eyes never leaving hers. Clara hesitated for a moment. Then she knelt to tie Finn's shoelace, a motion both tender and familiar. When she stood up, she answered, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll need trust and sunscreen." As the plane lifted off, Graham sat by the window. The 4 boys fought for a mutter view of the glittering city below. Clara leaned gently against his shoulder, whispering, "Are you sure you're not leaving anything important behind?" Graham took her hand, his eyes distant but steady. "I've missed too much already. From now on, whether it's a $1 million meeting or just an ordinary sunset, I'll choose what my kids will remember most." A few rows back, the flight attendant asked the boys, "And where are you all headed?" Finn answered for them all, "To find our dad, in a place where he doesn't need his phone." 5 years later, setting, Sunrise Academy graduation. Seattle. It was a bright, late spring afternoon. The audience was packed with parents. Purple and white decorations adorned the courtyard. In the front row, Graham Reed sat in a light gray suit, his hair now salt and pepper, filming with one hand and holding Clara's hand with the other. Now the creative director of a sustainable furniture brand. On stage stood Emerson Reed, 10 years old, delivering the class speech titled, "The Person Who Inspires Me Most." His voice was clear, bright, and steady. "I know most people will talk about famous people, but the one who inspires me most is my dad." A soft murmur swept the auditorium. Emerson continued, speaking without notes. "Dad's not perfect. I know he missed those early years, when I was learning to walk or crying through the night with tummy aches." Graham bowed his head, his eyes reddening. But then he showed up, and when he did, he brought the whole world with him. He learned to make pancakes, to make slime, to read all of Harry Potter over 7 summers, even if he could never remember the house names. Laughter rippled through the room. Graham smiled, covering his face as tears streamed freely. "I remember once I got a C on a fractions test. I thought he'd be disappointed. He used to be a CEO, after all. But he hugged me and said, 'Success isn't a grade. Success is getting back up and trying again.' That's when I knew. My dad is the strongest man I've ever met. Not because he's the best, but because he never gave up." Silence filled the room. Only the soft breeze drifted through a half-open window. On the small stage, draped in green cloth, Emerson Reed, one of the Reed Quadruplets, stood behind a microphone nearly as tall as he was. He wore a tiny suit, his navy tie askew, his dark brown hair slicked down by Clara, but still slightly unruly from nerves. His hands clutched a wrinkled sheet of paper. He took a deep breath. The spotlight cast a glow over his face. The same boy who once hid behind his mother at Cary Park on a cold winter day now stood tall before hundreds. "Today we graduate 5th grade," Emerson's voice rang out, stronger and clearer than anyone expected, "and I was chosen to give the class speech. But I don't want to talk about grades or awards. I want to talk about a lesson we just learned this year." The auditorium held its breath. Emerson looked down at the front row, where Graham Westfield, his father, sat gripping his knee, eyes unblinking. Beside him, Clara Monroe, his mother, held Finn's hand as if passing courage to them all. "My dad spent 5 years not knowing we existed," Emerson said, his voice beginning to tremble. "But in the 5 years after that, he taught us. Love isn't measured by time, but by whether we're brave enough to return, brave enough to begin again, and brave enough to learn how to be a father. Starting today." A soft sob escaped from the left side of the audience. A teacher quickly dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Emerson smiled, a smile that carried the spirit of young Graham. "And today, I'm not just graduating from 5th grade. I believe Dad is graduating too, from being the CEO of a global empire to be the CEO of the Reed family, and that's a title no one else can replace." Thunderous applause erupted across the auditorium like a storm finally released after hours of holding back. Graham jumped to his feet, the first to clap, his face lit up like sunlight after a long storm. From the back row, Caleb shouted with no restraint, "That's my little brother." Laughter burst through the tears. Hayden, the quietest of the four, whispered as if to himself, We're really lucky, huh?" Finn, eyes red but glowing, nodded and smiled toward their father. "No, Dad's the lucky one." The golden sunset bathed the backyard of their new home. A cozy craftsman-style house nestled in a quiet neighborhood near Mercer Island. A hand-painted wooden sign hung on the back patio wall, white letters across warm cedar. "Reed and Sons, family first, always." Graham had designed it himself, a mission statement for the life he chose to lead. On the lawn, the four boys tossed a rubber ball like beams of sunlight in motion. Clara stood by the grill, carefully brushing rosemary glaze over sizzling ribs, her apron puffed by the breeze, a sheen of sweat on her brow. Graham stood beside her, holding a pair of tongs, still wearing the apron embroidered with Dad Boss, a birthday gift from the boys. "Clara," he said softly, eyes on the kids, "do you think I did okay?" Clara paused. She turned to him, her gaze gentler than any spotlight, more soothing than any symphony that ever played in his once luxurious penthouse. "Graham," she replied, voice soft as a lullaby, "you didn't just do okay. You taught them to love by showing up, and that is something every man should learn." Graham didn't reply. He just smiled, then leaned over and placed another rib on Clara's plate. For the first time in years, his hand didn't tremble while doing something so simple for the woman he once lost. From the yard, the kids yelled. The ball dropped. "Dad, come kick it again." Graham dropped the tongs, untied his apron, and ran toward his children. His suit jacket tossed, his tie undone, but his heart, for the first time, completely whole.